Hey heroes, welcome to another star-spanning episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week we once again begin our tale in the galaxy of the Shi'ar Empire. We've talked about the history and culture of the Shi'ar race on the channel before, so for a detailed explanation, please refer to my video on Gladiator and the Imperial Guard. The short version is that they were an avian species whose religion centered around a pair of gods, Shara and Kaithri, who were forced into a marriage that ultimately made them both stronger. With this belief shaping their culture, the Shi'ar spread across their galaxy, marrying other worlds into their empire, willingly or not. One such world was Trilsart, third planet of the Cytrain-Omir star system and home of the Mephitosoids. I will note that those names are the ones given to them by the Shi'ar as the feline Mephitosoids, while capable of speech, did not have a spoken language of their own, instead communicating through pheromone odors. They could also use these pheromones to exert some level of control over one another, and while males would do so to command and inspire in battle, females typically only used this as part of their culture's mating ritual. The Mephitosoids also established a number of their own independent colonies, leading to a war with the Shi'ar approximately 1200 years ago. During this time, the Shi'ar Empire was much smaller than it is today, and so the ongoing conflict began to take its toll. Many of their soldiers fell to the Mephitosoid leader, a mighty warrior they dubbed the Butcher. During the war, while the male Mephitosoids fought, the females were hidden away in a peaceful abbey. After suffering a defeat at the hands of the Butcher, a Shi'ar officer named Tekil Alabar and his surviving troops discovered this location. The women inside took pity on the injured soldiers and attended to their wounds. Alabar, however, concocted a plan to turn the tide of battle and slaughtered every woman in the abbey. He then harvested their genetic material, using it to engineer a distilled version of their pheromones to drive his soldiers into a fanatical fervor. This proved to be the edge they needed to defeat the Butcher, and Tekil Alabar was heralded as a Shi'ar war hero, although the methods he used to achieve this victory were kept from the public. His slaughter at the Abbey was covered up, and it was instead said that he single-handedly inspired his men and led them to victory. To prevent further revolt from the Mephitosoids and to hide the shame of Alabar's atrocities, both he and the Butcher were placed into suspended animation and sent adrift into space. The remaining Mephitosoids, meanwhile, were driven back to their home planet, Trilsart, and quarantined there. Over the following centuries, the Shi'ar continued their expansion throughout the galaxy, eventually becoming the largest empire in the known universe. At some point, several decades ago or more, the Shi'ar clashed with a gold-skinned warrior race whose name and homeworld are not widely known. What we do know is that they held a strong religious belief that their warriors should die worthy deaths on the battlefield, a goal that many of them achieved in their war against the Shi'ar. One of these golden warriors was a man named Raza Longknife, Longknife being a literal translation of his actual surname. During his people's war with the Shi'ar, Raza's wife was killed, and his sons, Ryan and Danok, were taken away from him. As one of the last surviving members of his species, Raza himself was taken captive and experimented on by the Shi'ar. By the time they were done with him, he had been converted into a cyborg, artificially extending his life. This was totally counter to his religion's tenets, and so Raza swore revenge on the Shi'ar, who he viewed as infidels. An interesting note about Raza is that his speech often sounds like an antiquated version of English, likely due to a quirk with how his native language comes across when directly translated. Next, we look to another world in the Shi'ar Empire, Timor, the fourth planet of the Varanus star system. Approximately 85% of Timor's surface area is covered in water, with the rest primarily composed of tropical island chains. As a result, the planet's dominant life form, the reptilian humanoid saurids, evolved to be amphibious, possessing both gills and lungs. Standing at an average height of 9 feet, they could survive both on land and in the ocean's depths. And with Timor having roughly twice the gravity of Earth, the saurids also grew superhumanly strong. Initially lacking any form of space travel, they were a peaceful race primarily made up of scientists and philosophers. But that all changed when they were married into the Empire under the rule of Magister Deken Neramani. After that, the saurids were pressured into serving the Shi'ar as interstellar mercenaries, including one by the name of Chode. However, Chode turned against his masters when he was ordered to attack a village of innocent women and children. Refusing to comply, he instead murdered his commanding officer. The other saurids learned that he did this, but not why, and as a result he was forbidden from returning to Timor. The Shi'ar meanwhile sent Chode to the prison planet Alcibar, where he was forced to labor in their slave pits. As a side note, some sources imply that these mines were on the Shi'ar throne world Chandalar, possibly because the two worlds were relatively close together. Chode nearly gave in to despair, but his spirits were raised when he befriended a fellow prisoner, a female Mephitosoid. The two also allied themselves with another captive, the aforementioned cyborg Raza Longknife. But for the next part of our tale, we must turn our attention away from the Shi'ar galaxy and towards the planet Earth, third world of the Sol system in the Milky Way galaxy. Maybe you've heard of it. There we find a man named Christopher Summers. From a young age, Christopher was fascinated by the idea of space travel, and often dreamt of exploring alien worlds, like the swashbuckling adventurers he'd read about in science fiction stories. As an adult, he became a major in the United States Air Force, where he used the call sign Corsair, before serving as a test pilot. He married a woman named Catherine Ann, and the pair had 2 sons, Scott and Alex, with a third on the way. After being accepted into an astronaut training program, he took his family on a camping trip to Alaska, where they visited his parents, Philip and Deborah. Christopher flew them there himself using a vintage plane that he'd restored and rebuilt, the de Havilland Mosquito. But while they were making the journey back home, a large alien vessel appeared in the skies above them. Unbeknownst to the Summers family, this ship was a Shi'ar scout craft, which had traveled to the Milky Way to collect zoological specimens. When the invading vessel opened fire on the small wooden craft, Christopher's skills and experience as a pilot prevented immediate annihilation, but nonetheless the vintage plane was struck and doomed to crash. Hoping to save their children, Christopher had Catherine Ann strap Scott to the plane's only parachute. Scott then leapt out of the crashing vehicle, holding tight to his younger brother, Alex. The plane went down, but before it did, Christopher and Catherine were teleported onto the Shi'ar scout ship. There, they came face to face with Deken Neramani, the ruler of the Shi'ar Empire, who enjoyed personally overseeing zoological missions on occasion. The sadistic Magister also delighted in showing the couple that their plan to save their sons had failed, as the parachute they were strapped to had caught fire from the plane's burning remains. Christopher and Catherine were then brought back to the Shi'ar galaxy, unaware that Scott and Alex had narrowly survived. Separated from his pregnant wife, Christopher was confined to Chandalar's slave pens. However, he was unwilling to give up fighting and eventually succeeded in breaking free. Desperate to save his remaining family, he made it all the way to the Emperor's bedchamber, where he found Deken attempting to force himself onto Catherine. Christopher went to intervene, but was swiftly prevented by the palace's armored guards. In the face of this defiance, D'Ken changed his plans for the woman, and instead of claiming her for himself, the Mad Emperor brutally murdered Catherine Ann Summers in front of her husband. Then, to completely break what remained of Christopher's spirit, he ripped the unborn baby from her womb and held it aloft. His entire family taken away from him, Christopher Summers was then sent to labor in the slave mines of Alcibar, and after years of torture, he eventually accepted his unfortunate fate. Then one day, he had an encounter with a rebellious female Mephitosoid. She was fleeing from the prison guards, but was caught after inadvertently running into Christopher. The savage guards began brutally beating her, and Christopher weakly attempted to intervene. This caused them to turn their attention on him, whipping him with a neurolash until the human begged them to stop. The white-furred woman was then taken away, while Christopher was left to wallow in his depression. But then he found himself confronted by Chode and Raza, who were looking for their Mephitosoid ally. The two ultimately left him behind upon realizing that his spirit was broken, but their words stirred something within Christopher Summers. After witnessing and experiencing so much injustice and cruelty, he finally started to remember the man he once was, and the man that he once dreamed he could be. No longer willing to cower and act only out of self-preservation, he snuck up behind the guards who were holding the Mephitosoid captive and attacked them. He likely would have met his end there, but Chode and Raza intervened as well, helping him defeat the guards. While they did, Christopher succeeded in freeing the captive woman from her chains. In response to this, the Mephitosoid forged a life bond with Christopher, marking them as allies until death, which she admittedly suspected would be soon. However, the four prisoners decided to band together and make their escape. When asked his name, Christopher identified himself as Corsair, leaving his old life behind to begin a new one. He also gave his Mephitosoid companion a name of her own, Mamselle Hepzibah. This was in reference to an attractive cartoon skunk with the same name from an Earth comic strip. Corsair, Hepzibah, Chode, and Raza ultimately succeeded in escaping by stealing a starship that would become their new home, the Starjammer. This vessel also contained an onboard artificial intelligence who Corsair named Waldo, after a short story by Robert A. Heinlein. Becoming known as the Starjammers, Corsair and his allies traveled through Shi'ar space, earning infamy as freebooters and outlaws. For the next part of our tale, we turn our attention to yet another world, the planet Lupus, which was populated by small animal-like beings. Among these lupines was a white-furred individual named Cree and his mate Latal. However, when Latal became pregnant with Cree's litter, he felt that he was unready for parenthood and fled the planet. He subsequently came upon the Starjammers, although only Chode was able to understand his language. The two quickly became friends, with Cree often perching on Chode's shoulder and thus being seen as the Sword's pet. At some point, the Starjammers also met a member of the insectoid Krillite race. Hailing from the planet Krillylissa in the Krill star system, this species possessed natural empathic abilities as well as the power to mentally scan the interior of organic beings. With a population of roughly 3.7 million, the Krillites were well regarded and sought after as both doctors and diplomats. And so when the opportunity presented itself, the Starjammers recruited one onto their crew to serve as the ship's medic. Due to his people's passing resemblance to an Earth helicopter, Corsair named this Krillite Sikorsky, after the aircraft manufacturing company. For several years, the Starjammers wandered the galaxy as space pirates, surviving by plundering Imperial vessels. But then one day, the Shi'ar rediscovered an ancient, powerful artifact, the M-Kron Crystal. Located on a planet referred to simply as the World, the M-Kron Crystal contained within it a nexus of all realities. Despite the warnings of his younger sister Lilandra, Emperor Decken was determined to harness and weaponize the crystal's dangerous energies. According to legend, the gateway within the crystal could only be accessed once every million years when the 9 Death Stars, each of which was actually a far-off galaxy, formed a certain alignment in the skies above the world. And of course it just so happened that that time was fast approaching. Upon learning all of this, Corsair was determined to foil Decken's ambitions, and the other Starjammers voluntarily stood by him. Meanwhile, Princess Lilandra traveled to Earth and allied herself with the X-Men, enlisting them in her cause. The whole situation culminated in a confrontation between the heroic mutants and Decken's Imperial Guard on the world. And in the ensuing battle, the Starjammers jumped into the fray, aiding Lilandra and the X-Men. Working together, the two teams defeated some of the mightiest warriors in the Shi'ar galaxy. Corsair shook hands with the X-Men's field leader, Cyclops, with neither man suspecting the connection between them. Suspicious of the situation, the Cosmic Phoenix Force, who was impersonating the telepathic X-Man Jean Grey at the time, scanned Corsair's mind and learned the truth. But it was at that moment when the Death Stars aligned and the dimensional gateway within the Emkron crystal opened, causing reality to momentarily blink out of existence. After the universe returned, a diminutive but formidable creature called Jaff emerged from seemingly nowhere to defend the crystal. The X-Men defeated Jaff, but then a second Guardian, Mott, appeared, claiming to be 1,000 times stronger than his predecessor. Apparently, this sequence would continue with increasingly powerful champions emerging until any potential threats were defeated. But before things could get any worse, Raza Longknife hoisted Decken aloft and threw him into the crystal itself, hoping to stop the Emperor's mad ambitions. When he did so, both the X-Men and the Starjammers were transported inside as well, where they found themselves in what appeared to be a sprawling, empty city that seemed to stretch on endlessly in every direction. At the heart of this was the Emkron Sphere, which itself housed a neutron galaxy of infinite mass, where the nexus of all realities was located. While in the presence of the sphere, the X-Men and the Starjammers were both assaulted by nightmarish visions of their fears and failures. The Phoenix was the first to recover from this, but she was too late to stop Cyclops from damaging the sphere with his optic blast. Anchoring herself with the life force of her allies, the Phoenix was able to repair the Emkron sphere before the neutron galaxy could spill out and destroy all of reality. She also convinced Corsair to help, pulling him out of the memory of his wife's murder by calling him by his real name. She also revealed the truth to him that Cyclops was his eldest son, Scott, who had actually been alive this whole time. In the end, the Phoenix prevented the annihilation of the universe, and both the X-Men and Starjammers were freed from within the crystal. Decken also emerged, but his mind was so overwhelmed by the whole experience that he was rendered completely catatonic. As a result, his kinder sister, Lilandra, rose up to stake her claim for the throne, and soon became the Magistrix of the Shi'ar Empire. In the aftermath of that conflict, Corsair asked the Phoenix not to tell Scott the truth about him, suspecting his son was better off not knowing. She reluctantly agreed, and the Starjammers departed back to their ship to continue their freebooting adventures. However, Decken and Lilandra were not the only Naramani siblings. They also had an older sister, known to the galaxy simply as Deathbird. After Lilandra rose to power, Deathbird began conspiring to seize the throne for herself. As part of this, a commando force of Deathbird's loyalists attacked a meeting of the Shi'ar High Council and abducted the Empress. The Starjammers were falsely implicated in this plot and subsequently ambushed by a battalion of Imperial troopers. While his teammates were captured, Corsair succeeded in escaping and taking a smaller ship back to Earth. After his vessel was damaged by a Shi'ar dreadnought, he crash-landed near the X-Men's mansion where he was recovered by Cyclops and Storm. He was knocked out for a time, during which Cyclops found his military dog tags, as well as a locket containing pictures of his family. With the cat out of the bag, Corsair admitted the truth, which Scott did not take well. However, they did not have time to deal with that before being attacked by an alien race called the Sidri. We haven't really talked about them on the channel before, so let's do that now. The Sidri, or Sidrian hunters, are a semi-insectoid arthropodal species of nomadic predators. Having evolved in a deep space asteroid cluster, they have no home planet and can survive in a vacuum with no oxygen or heat. They are also capable of joining together in large numbers to form a single giant Sidri with a collective consciousness, and the ability to fly through space like a starship. Furthermore, each individual Sidri is both sentient and intelligent. As such, they generally worked as bounty hunters in the Shi'ar galaxy and were hired by Deathbird's forces to stop Corsair from recruiting the X-Men. This ultimately failed as Corsair, Cyclops, and Storm worked together to destroy the colony who pursued them. Although Corsair's willingness to kill a sentient being only served to widen the divide between him and his son. Stuck on Earth for the time being, Corsair and the X-Men were later attacked by Deathbird herself. During that battle, Deathbird was aided by yet another insectoid race, the Brood. Forced to work together again, Corsair and Cyclops agreed to put their differences aside for the greater good. Joining forces with the feline Avenger Tigra, the heroes ultimately survived that encounter. However, they were unable to prevent Deathbird from abducting her sister's consort, Professor Xavier. Furthermore, the Russian X-Man Colossus was badly injured during the battle. Fortunately, the other Starjammers were able to escape from the Shi'ar with their ship intact. Beaming Corsair and the X-Men aboard, the pirate crew was reunited, and Colossus's wounds were tended to with alien technology. Finally having a peaceful moment alone, Corsair revealed to Cyclops what happened to his mother and how the Starjammers met. With father and son working together, they soon succeeded in rescuing both Lilandra and Xavier from the Brood. They thwarted Deathbird's attempts to frame the Earth for Lilandra's disappearance, outing her co-conspirators in the process. After that adventure, the Starjammers remained on Earth for a time, during which they befriended someone who would later join them for a while, the X-Men's ally Carol Danvers. Cyclops also took Corsair to reunite with his other son, Alex Summers, aka Havoc. By this point, Alex was in a relationship with the magnetic mutant Lorna Dane, who Corsair also met. Years after that, both Alex and Lorna would become Starjammers as well, but we've already talked about those events elsewhere on the channel. In fact, I already have videos where you can find out more details about Danvers, Deathbird, Cyclops, Havoc, and even the other Summers brother, Vulcan. I'll go ahead and link some relevant videos in the description below if you'd like to see more, but that is all I have for you this weekend. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here. But Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. Going forward, I'm also going to upload the videos directly to Patreon so paid members can watch them ad-free. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!